Hello and welcome to the first Wilder Lincolnshire podcast of 2025 from the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust. I'm Melvyn Pryor and Matthew Capper's here. Hi Matthew.
Hi Melvyn, how are we doing?
Very well. Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Did you have a good Christmas?
Very good Christmas, thank you. Bit of wildlifing on the side as well. Recently been up to Farrings for a look round there. But today, what a glorious day we've got at Wisby, just outside the Education Centre, looking across the main lake here.
It's been really cold for the last week or two. We had floods in the UK. We had then a real cold snap. This place was frozen solid. It's thawed pretty much right the way across. The patch in front of us is still just iced over. But all of the ducks, as it's starting to thaw, it's starting to put seeds and other things across the water column. They're just feeding merrily in front of us, aren't they?
Absolute glorious sight here. And I was thinking the water level was down, but then I've realised the walkway is underwater and under ice, isn't it?
Yeah, the pond dipping platform is completely covered. This is probably about as high as this lake will get. Graham, the warden here, he can control the water levels across the different lakes, but the conditions that we've had, everything is just brim full at the moment. Glorious
light this afternoon as well, just coming in the early afternoon. We can hear some of the birds calling in the background. Just give us a sort of a potted history of what we're looking at the minute.
Yeah, so we had widgeon. There's one just flapping its wings over there.
Oh, yeah.
They make a wonderful whistling noise. One of my favourite winter noises. They go, so they're really cool. We've had those. There's a shoveler, female shoveler, just down here in front of us. Over on the right here, there's several gadwall. We've got a whole load of tufted ducks. There's some cormorants out here at the back. There's some teal right on the distant island over there. Can't see right across to the far side. There was goosander the other day, but I haven't seen anything yet today. But you sometimes get golden eye and goosander right on the very far side in the deeper water. So plenty out there.
And they'll be enjoying this milder spell at the moment in case it gets colder again.
Yeah, I mean, I was at Rutland Water at the weekend, and before the thaw kicked in, it seemed to be the only open water in the area, and most of the birds just had found their way across to there because, you know, the duck species, they really do suffer in cold weather if they can't get access to food. So this thaw is really welcome news for these birds.
And as we're sort of getting towards perhaps the springtime, we will start to see different types of birds coming through at Wisby, will we?
Yeah, so the winter wildfowl, you know, it's been cold the last week or so, but actually the UK is generally milder than a lot of the continent. So we get a lot of wildfowl over here just for the winter. Eventually those will head back. And so it'll change to the summer birds, and we'll get the gull colony come back again, and it'll be a real kind of cacophony of noise out here come sort of March, April time, which is really nice when that sort of seasonal change happens. And then we'll get the summer migrants come back. So everything's always changing.
And this is the joy of when we've been out doing our wildlife podcasts. And one of the big changes that I noticed before Christmas, and we were talking about this in the last podcast, the fact that you've got volunteers out doing lots of work. And one key place before Christmas is Donna Nook, of course.
Yeah, I mentioned in the last podcast that they would be there on Christmas Day. Come rain or shine, they would be out there doing their volunteering. And you actually managed to get out there in the run-up to Christmas to sort of have a chat and see what they do.
I did, and it was my first visit to Donna Nook. I have to say, I was so impressed. I hadn't realised quite how close to the seals you get.
Yeah, and I was really surprised that you hadn't been before,
No.
to be fair, having, you know, lived and worked in Lincolnshire for so long. So, yeah, really delighted that you got to go out there and see what is an incredible experience, isn't it?
It is indeed, and I think a wildlife spectacle.
Yeah, and we get probably about 60,000 people come over the 3 months. It really is a very popular and well-loved annual part of the wildlife calendar here in Lincolnshire.
Yeah, I was certainly very impressed, certainly to get as close as I could to the seals. This is how I got on. So, Matt, this is my first visit to Donna Nook in all the times that I've lived in and around Lincolnshire, and I've come at the best time, haven't I?
You have, yes. Well, welcome. Yes, right at the pupping season here. We've got a bull, cow and pup in front of us here, showing a bit of aggression. We're right at the peak, really, of our pupping season that takes place from October right through to the end of December.
That's the seal making a noise, not you.
It is. That's the pup calling mum, wanting to be fed. This pup here is probably about 3 weeks old. It's just starting to molt, but still wanting to be fed. And the bull here is just hanging around wanting to mate with the female.
Now, this is interesting. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But just looking at this pup here that's waving at me at the minute, almost the size of the cow.
Yes, when they're born, they're about 14 kilograms in weight. They'll double that weight in the first week. And then there'll be something around 45 kilograms after 3 weeks, at which point they're fully weaned. So lactation finishes with the female. Grey seal milk is 52% fat, about 19% protein. So hence they put on a lot of weight in a short space of time.
Let's talk about the area where we are. Donna Nook is known as a bombing range, isn't it? And the red flags are up. So
yep.
Is it still active at this time of the year when the seals are here? It's
active all year round. It's been an air weapons range since 1973, and Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust has had a management agreement with the MOD here since 1978. No seals have ever been harmed by any activities with the aircraft over, and basically there's a series of targets down the beach. In this day and age, any of the modern fighter aircraft that are coming in, and some of the rotary winged aircraft as well, use thermal imaging cameras. They certainly wouldn't be firing at any targets if there was any hint of anything lying underneath. It might not be a seal. No, indeed. But you were saying you had aircraft over here this morning before I arrived. Yeah, there were 4 Eurofighters came in this morning, and we often have F-15s, the Americans, coming in to use the range as well. So yeah, the only target they won't use is target 1 from the 1st of November to the end of December, and that's because it's right on the Nook, which is the narrowest point to the sea, where a lot of the seals actually make their way into the dunes to have their pups. This is incredible here, and I did just say to you, how far does the sea come in here? And you were just telling me it is actually high tide. I can't see the sea. It's high tide. I know we're only at about a 6.15 metre tide this afternoon. High tide's at 2 o'clock. And yeah, it's barely reached the green shore, has it? You can barely see the sea from here. It's about 1 kilometre away. Only on sort of spring tides do we see the tide really come up to the front of the dunes here. So probably only sort of once or twice a month, if that. You've got the fencing area here just before we get into the dunes itself. So the seals try and get as close to the dune as they can. Yeah, so here it is quite narrow. As we walk further down, you'll see there's more dune frontage in front of the fencing. But the reason why they're coming to have their pups so far up the beach is just to keep away from the inundation of the tide. When grey seal pups are born, they're not born with their adult coat. They have this white coat, which is light and fluffy, which traps air, called lanugo. And they lose that, they molt that and gain their adult coat after 3 weeks. So until they do that, because they haven't put a layer of fat on, they're quite wrinkly when they're born. They need that fur in order to keep themselves warm. So keeping out the inundation of the tide actually helps them. So we're a very safe beach here for them pupping, which is why they've chosen Donna Nook, because they can come in. And it's, you know, probably only once a month when we get a tide where it'll actually reach them. And is there a history? Does it go back hundreds of years, do you think, that seals would have come and pupped here? Well, pupping has been known here since at least the 1970s. Right. Pupping used to occur on the outer sand ridges nearer to the tide line, and then in the early 80s some of those cows came into the dunes and realised that obviously this was much safer than having the inundation of the tide twice a day. And then since the early 80s, when there were just a handful of pups born here, the numbers have been a bit like a hockey stick graph, really. You know, for the last 4 years we've had sort of 2,200 pups born here. Wow. So that, you know, it's been a steady increase since the early 80s. And talking about how far away the sea is, we see some ships just on the horizon there. So basically the seals haul themselves out and head for the dune then. That's right. I mean, obviously they know when it's time to pup. The females will usually come in a couple of days before it's time to give birth. Because they don't feed when they're up here, they want to be up here for a minimum amount of time as possible. But I've timed a seal actually coming in from the tide line up to here, which is probably about 1 kilometre in places, and it would probably take them sort of about 45-50 minutes. Yeah, it's quite incredible, really.
They've got to be keen then.
Yes, yeah. I call it hauling. That's they haul themselves up. But
well, I think of them hauling out of the sea. But what about the actual flomping along?
Well, I mean, they don't walk or run, do they? So Ruth, my colleague, who've met before, she likes to call it flumping. Flomping.
See, that describes it for me.
Yeah.
Flumping. Yeah, yeah. Well, there's one that's sort of flumped in the water at the minute.
There is. That bull there is obviously given up now, hasn't he? And is just resting there. They do like to lie in the creeks and the pools. I think they feel security being around water.
And the thing is, and we'll go into the detail now because I hadn't appreciated this.
Right.
Okay, so the cows don't stay with the pups for that long, do they?
No. So when they come in, they're in for a couple of days, then they give birth, and they'll be lactating for about 18 to 21 days. So the pup will be fully weaned at about 3 weeks in general. And then that's her job done. So the pup is left on its own. While she's been here, she's not been feeding. She may have lost about a third to 40% of her body weight. So she needs to get back to sea and start feeding up. And it's at that point then that the pup is pretty much left on its own. It will be basically living off its own fat reserves for the next 2 weeks. So it may be 5 weeks on the beach before it then will feel hunger and decide it's time to make its way out to sea for the first time.
Hence why the pup is so fat. I don't want to be rude to the pup there, but it's got to live on that then until it goes out to sea.
Exactly, it's just going to live off its own fat reserves, yeah. So it will slim down. They're quite barrel shaped, aren't they?
Yeah.
Not very agile. So we'll see some weaned pups a little bit further up where they're now starting to explore in the creeks, and they slim down, a lot more agile, and I say hunger will kick in and that will drive them to sea.
But the parents then aren't there to teach them how to fish, how to catch fish or anything. They're literally fending for themselves once the cow goes off.
That's right, yeah, absolutely independent of the adults. Yep, absolutely.
Now the other trick of this is, okay, the cows come up, have their pups. Why are the bulls here? As if I didn't know.
Well, they have no maternal instincts at all. They're not here to have anything to do with the raising of the pup. They're only here for one thing, and that is to mate with the females and produce next year's offspring, basically.
Okay, so they mate now.
Yes.
We're into December.
Yep.
But they won't have the pups until next November, December.
So you're thinking, Melvyn,
yes,
that the gestation
12
period
months.
is 12 months or 11.5 months or whatever. But if I was to tell you that the gestation period is 8 months, how can that be?
Yes, yeah. How can that be?
So there's a delayed implantation of about 100 days because her body is not in a good condition to develop another pup so soon after just having a pup herself. So basically, this delayed implantation for 100 days then gives her body time to recover. And that's called obligate embryonic diapause. A little bit of a mouthful.
I'm glad you had to say that.
So basically what happens is the egg is fertilised, it splits into 4, but it doesn't actually attach to the uterus wall. So it's free swimming and is known as a blastocyst. Only after 100 days does that attach to the uterus wall and start to develop true as an embryo. And then the 8th month gestation period kicks in, brings her back round to a full year cycle.
Did you know all this before you became warden?
I knew a bit of it, yeah, but we get asked so many questions by the visiting public that it just rolls off the tongue after a little while.
So bull will hopefully mate with cow.
Yes.
Off they'll go.
Yep.
They'll come back here next year and have that pup. It's an incredible story, isn't it?
It's incredible. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people visit here and think they don't do a lot, do they? They're just laid around. Well, one of the reasons they're laid around is obviously they're conserving energy because they're not feeding while they're here. But when we tell people, you know, what's actually going on and the story around them, people are just fascinated. Yeah.
One of the key things we want to get across. Fencing here,
yes.
It's important that if people do visit, they don't attempt to go across the fence because from their safety point of view, but also from the seal's point of view as well.
That's right. Back in the early 80s, when there was only a few pups born, it was only a few local people that knew that the grey seals were here, giving birth. Over time, as those pup numbers have increased and the number of seals has increased, of course, news has got round, and the visitor numbers have increased also. So what started off as just having a Land Rover parked on the beach and warning people to keep a distance has now then gone from a roped off area to a single fence, and now we have an all ability access path so that people of all abilities can actually view the seals, and a double fence so people don't try and reach through and touch the seals.
Because it can affect the seals. You can lose some pups, can't you, if they get too much interference?
The scent of the pup, that recognition between cow and pup is important, particularly in the first few days, maintaining that bond. And if somebody was to reach through and stroke a pup or do something like that, if they put their scent on there, then the cow might decide to leave the pup. It's not a wise thing to do. Grey seal pups are born with their adult teeth, and they have a lot of bacteria in their mouths. Inuits lose fingers because wounds don't heal. They have to sort of have them amputated. So there's a thing called seal finger.
You haven't got it?
No,
Thank
still
goodness.
got all
Still got
fingers.
yours,
I still have to do lots of counting.
Yeah.
So it's not wise to try and, although they look cute and cuddly, and they've got long claws as well on the end of their flippers.
Why so many these days then? Because you said in the 80s, a vehicle down here, be aware of the seals. Now we're dealing with huge numbers. You've not done anything to the environment here, have you?
No, not at all. Basically, what's happened is the lack of persecution by ourselves, by man.
Right, okay.
So, they've been hunted in the past for their fur, for oil from their fat, and for their meat.
But not off the Lincolnshire coast, surely?
No, but elsewhere.
Right.
And so, going back to the early part of the century, you would only find seal colonies on remote Scottish islands because they wanted to keep away from their main predator. So the only predator, with them being an apex predator themselves, the only predators for grey seals is orca and great white shark. Now, we don't necessarily get those in our waters
not too
here.
many.
No, but some of these seals may encounter orca up in Shetland, for instance. So basically, up until I think the last culls for grey seals was around sort of 77, 78. There was even supposed to be a cull on the Farne Islands, and there was public outcry then, and basically they put a stop to those culls. Now, the reasons for those culls was because they were thought they were damaging commercial fish stocks. So the government wanted to sort of keep a restriction on the number of seals, obviously to preserve our own commercial fish stocks. So it's interesting that since the 70s, numbers have then increased. But there's various things that have taken place to prove that, grey seals are not just feeding on commercial fish species. They will feed on, benthic species as well, sort of bottom-feeding fish, not all just commercial species.
Interesting. I think cow is coming more attracted to the bull, don't you?
Yeah, she's getting a bit closer now, isn't she?
She is, and when we arrived, this has happened quite quickly, actually.
Yep.
Love at first sight.
Well, I don't know about that.
And poor old pups in the background, they're just, I'll just sit here and eat my reserves and carry on.
Looking the other way, yeah.
And there was also, interesting here, you were telling me earlier, there was a particular reaction that they have where perhaps the bulls might be protecting their own territory, and some things have been observed here at Donna Nook. Yeah,
so we're a little bit different to a lot of other seal colonies in that we've got wet sand and mud. And something that it was a behaviour that was first witnessed here at Donna Nook, and that was body slapping by the bulls. So just as a silverback gorilla might beat its chest to prove how big and dominant it is, it was found that some of the bulls were lifting themselves up, dropping themselves on the wet sand or mud and creating that slapping noise, and basically showing to other bulls that don't bother fighting with me, I'm bigger or bulkier than you, or to a female to prove that he's more dominant, he's a good size, he's the one that she should be mating
with. So not slapping bellies together, they were slapping their bellies down on the floor. Sand.
So they lift themselves up with their front flippers and then drop themselves. If we're lucky, we might hear that as we walk up, but yeah. Otherwise, there's a lot of gesturing and that goes on, opening the mouth, hissing, positioning themselves along the track to sort of stop other seals coming in. So there's a lot of gesturing. He's backing away now. Look, as she's
more aggressive than the bull. She's sending him off. Now, I suppose this is key time that people think of Donna Nook and the seals. What about the rest of the year? What else happens here during the rest of the year?
Yeah, so, I mean, the seals are here all year round. They only come into the dunes to have their pups. So they're out on the outer sandbanks and things. I mean, we've got a number of habitats here. I mean, Donna Nook's a National Nature Reserve, part of the Lincolnshire Coronation Coast National Nature Reserve. We're just at the mouth of the Humber here, 7 miles off Spurn Point Lighthouse, which is just there in the distance. Look. 7 miles as the crow flies. So this is an important wintering area for waders and wildfowl. But in the summer, well, if I just mention the habitats, of course we've got the sea itself and the estuary, and then we've got intertidal mudflats and sandflats, then leading into salt marsh, upper salt marsh, and then into the sand dunes themselves, where we've got dune grassland and dune scrub. So in the summer, very different. The dune grassland is fabulous for different insects, things like the green hair streak butterfly, and also breeding for several different warbler species. So we get a number of migrants that visit the place in the summer, and then of course obviously with the sea buckthorn berries in the winter, we get quite an attraction of winter thrushes and things as well, which come and visit the coast.
So Donna Nook is not just for seals.
It's not just for seals, no. And at high tide at the moment, probably just bit out of shot really, but there's huge flocks of brent geese and oyster catcher and redshank and things out there at the moment. So it's not just the air weapons range being off limits for the public is not just benefiting the seals here, but it's also benefiting the other wildlife out there on the salt marsh and the sand and mud flats.
Nick, you're one of the volunteers here at Donna Nook. What got you involved to start with?
Well, I started here, many years ago. I said, I want to go to Donna Nook. Talked about it many times, never done it, and I thought, let's go. And I went. 26th of December also happens to be the sort of about the peak when the seals are here. And like so many people, I just stepped over the dunes and I thought, oh my goodness, this is incredible. And then I met one of the other volunteer wardens, whose name is Tricia. She still works here. And I said, Tricia, how do you become a volunteer? Because this is absolutely marvellous. And she gave me the details and I started. So that's how I started.
This is my first visit and I find it quite remarkable. I didn't appreciate you'd be as close to the seals as you are.
I know, it's and this is it. It is it's unique and I think we're privileged to have this on our doorstep.
As a volunteer, you obviously see lots of visitors. What do they say to you, and do they travel far to come and see them?
Oh, they travel from all over the country, sometimes abroad. We have regular visitors from France and Italy, but we have it's visitors all sorts really. We have school visitors, people who are just interested in nature, but also universities as well. So we have a really wide range of visitors with different objectives. Some are here just to observe the seals, not only the seals, but sometimes the aircraft, because it's an active military site, and obviously this time of year migratory birds. So there's a lot for people to actually see.
Is it a time of the year that you look forward to?
Yes, in short, yes.
And what is it? What's so special about it for you?
When I'm retired now, but I think when I was working, I always saw Donna Nook as a place where I could come for myself in some respects. It was sort of good for my own well-being and doing something different, but also contributing to the site, to nature, and also helping visitors enjoy the experience.
Well, it is an amazing experience just looking here now, watching the pups, watching the cows and the bulls. It's just a remarkable place.
It is indeed. Yeah, when I after a few years, I did think, am I going to get seal fatigue? Is it going to lose its magic? And the answer is no, because every time you come, there is something different to see. The seal behaviours change throughout the season. I've been fortunate to see a birth this year, which is great, and I was able to get some visitors to come and witness that, and they understandably very appreciative that I was able to do that for them. So
very good. Well done to all you do and all the rest of the volunteers as well, because it wouldn't be possible without all the volunteers, would it?
No, but I think a lot of credit has to go to Matt and Ruth, who are the main wardens here. They are incredibly supportive, and every year I think I certainly set myself out to try and learn something different about the seals every year, and Matt and Ruth are just so knowledgeable and so giving of their time to actually improve our experience as wardens. So it's great.
This is very special, just listening to the sounds
of the
seals.
It's eerie when it's foggy you come onto the site and all you can hear is the noises, and it's a bit eerie.
That's Nick, one of the volunteers at Donna Nook with the seals. And before that, we heard from Matt, the warden there. And Matthew, it's just incredible. I was blown away by the whole experience.
Yeah, I can remember my first visit as well. You don't really know quite what to expect, and you just assume that there's going to be these things distantly out there, and then all of a sudden you're confronted with feet away.
Yes.
It's just really, really quite moving, actually, isn't it?
It is very, very special. It will stay with me for a long, long time. Seemed to be a lot of seals there, but we have now got the latest figures through, haven't we?
Yep, so the season has finished and they've done all the final number crunching. 1,650 pups this year. Actually quite a bit down on the last few years where it's been stable at about 2,200. We think, actually, I mean, there could be a number of different factors involved in that, but the most likely reason is that there's a new colony further south on the Suffolk coast that's been rapidly expanding the last few years down at Orford Ness. And so both at Donna Nook and at Horsey on the Norfolk coast, numbers have gone down this year, but it just looks like a change in the distribution across the North Sea, really, rather than any particularly problematic thing.
And we're talking about the same type of seal, are we?
Yes, these are grey seals. We do get common seals on the Lincolnshire coast. If you go to Gibraltar Point, you're going to be seeing common seal, or harbour seal as they're also called. But no, this is the grey seal population that we're talking about. One
of those special sites, and as I say, really, really incredible to go and enjoy that. A tinge of sadness, I think, now, because we've been doing this for the past year. And Matthew, this is your final Wilder Lincolnshire podcast because you're moving on to pastures new.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just been the podcast over the last year. You know, you've welcomed me onto your show while you're on BBC Radio Lincolnshire as well. So, but the podcast has been an absolute joy. One of the highlights of the last year for me has been being able to get out and spend time with you on our fantastic sites, talking about the wonderful wildlife and the work that we do. I am going to miss it terribly, but I am moving to a new job at the end of the month. I'm heading to Doddington Hall with their rewilding their estate, and I'm going to be getting involved in that. So, you know, really looking forward to something a bit different, but at the same time, I shall really, really miss the trust, and I shall really miss all that we get involved in, and I shall miss the podcast too.
Indeed. Well, I tell you what, you are a great educator. I don't pretend to know a great deal about wildlife and nature, but your enthusiasm keeps me going and wants me to go out and find out more. And that really is a real skill to have, to pass on your knowledge to other people.
Wow, that's very, very kind. Thank you very much. No, that means a lot. And that is one of my passions and one of the things that has really kind of defined my kind of nature conservation career. So that means a lot. And hopefully, you know, I can continue doing that at Doddington. And I know you guys will continue doing that with the podcast.
Well, I certainly hope so. Matthew, thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure over the past 12 months. And thanks to you for listening in to the Wilder Lincolnshire podcast from the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust.